Hello, I'm Gus Downing, publisher and editor of the D&D Daily, and this is the Loss Prevention News Network. Today we have with us Keith White, the Senior Vice President of Loss Prevention and Corporate Administration for the Gap stores. Hello, Keith. How are you today?
Great, Gus. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
In today's episode, in our Leadership and Development series, Keith is going to spend some time talking about his career and hopefully sharing some insight with us so that you, the viewers, can get a feel for his progression and the value he's added to the industry. Now, Keith, you started out in the industry with a 4-year degree from Western Illinois University in law enforcement.
That's correct. I began my career literally as an intern. And just quick story.
Sure.
I was about to graduate, working the midnight shift at Burger King, of all places. And I get a call from a friend who says, "Hey, Keith, there's this loss prevention job out there that they want me to interview for, but I already have a job. Are you interested?" And I said, "Absolutely. By the way, what's loss prevention?" Had no idea. And went on the interview, ultimately got the job, and I found that, number one, it was far better than the midnight shift at Burger King. But more importantly, for me, being a graduate with a law enforcement degree, it was the perfect blend of two worlds. There was the investigations piece, which absolutely fascinated me: internal employee theft, external theft, organized retail crime. But then there was also the budget, leading teams, managing people, understanding the different business relationships. So all of the academic training that I had up to that point, combined with my interests in investigations and law enforcement, found a real nice intersection. And that's how I got started and what propelled my career.
In the first few years, you spent in the distribution arena with
That's correct.
Zehrs and Marshall Fields.
That's correct.
Okay.
For those who remember Zehr, it was very much a retailer like a Kmart or a Target back then. It was one of the bigger discounters. And working in the supply chain really helped hone two skills for me. One was investigations. I always like to say, for those who work in the supply chain network, they understand how hard it is to get a case there. I mean, you literally have to work every inch of details, every inch of leads, every inch of reports, as opposed to stores where sometimes cases show up on a silver platter. In a DC, there's no such thing. The second skill was the whole sphere of influence. And when you're working in a distribution center environment, you really have to understand that your sphere of influence is much greater than the folks who report to you. I had a very small team reporting to me, so it was so important to get the people who worked in the shipping department or the receiving department or other areas in the building to feel like they were part of the LP team. Because without them, there was absolutely no way I could be successful. And that's often underestimated when you transition over to stores, because you kind of feel like, I could be successful with or without them. In the distribution center environment or the supply chain environment, there's no way you can be successful. So once you learn that whole skill of influencing others and getting them to support your ideas or your initiatives, it's without a doubt a competitive advantage for you as an executive growing in the business.
Now, do you have safety and audit within that realm as well?
Yes.
While you were in the DCs?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Operational audit, where we audited for accuracy in shipments and shortages or concealed shortages and that type of thing. And then the whole safety piece, where we had OSHA-related standards that we had to control for, along with all the different recordable accidents and things of that nature. So it was a wonderful foundation for me to launch my career.
And then Marshall Fields, obviously being a division of Dayton Hudson, they put you into a regional position covering some of their department stores.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you talk to the transition there of moving from the distribution to the store side?
It was very interesting because, when you're in a distribution center environment, a lot of the traditional principles with respect to loss prevention or security come into play. For example, access control is absolute. You literally can control who accesses your building and who egresses your building. In a stores environment, it's the exact opposite. Tens of thousands of people, would come into your stores every year, and you had absolutely no control of it. And it was really fascinating to go through that transition of an absolute mindset in terms of what you control versus having a lot less of a control, if you will, over your physical environment and understanding that you're a lot more vulnerable. That was one lesson that I think I made a really nice transition into. But secondary to that, in a stores environment, is the relationships and the building of relationships, not just with associates, but with the management team members, because things move a lot faster in the store environment. And if you can't move as fast as the thought process and the strategies and the action points, you very quickly get left behind. And then you get labeled as someone who's not as dependable and not as nimble and ultimately not effective.
So that was a big transition for you in recognizing all of that and such.
It absolutely was. But the foundation I had in the supply chain set me up well to make the transition. And I think in a lot of instances, people underestimate all the different experiences that they bring into a new role. A lot of times they work so hard on assimilating to the new environment that anything that they've learned up to that point, sometimes they dismiss. And I was lucky enough to kind of keep a lot of the fundamental things that I had learned and said some of it applies, some of it doesn't apply right now. It may ultimately apply, but all of it really applies.
And you also, though, with that background, understood the flow of goods, the
Yes.
flow of the merchandise,
Yes.
from the time the retailer received it to the time that the retailer is now selling it.
Yes.
So you were able to build that path of flow of merchandise through those first 8 years of your experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. Which is something that's underestimated because when you think about that whole life cycle of a product, I like to call in a store's environment the receiving area the black hole of shrink. Because in many instances, if you have a loss that's occurring in your back office area or your supply chain area, and you're spending 95%, as most practitioners do, in your store's environment, you'll never solve for what's lost. So a lot of times I coach and advise my team members to make sure that first and foremost, the black hole isn't where the shrink is occurring. Because if it is, you'll never know it,
Right.
and you'll never solve for it.
Right, right.
So start there, and that was something that was invaluable for me as I grew into business.
Well, a lot of people undervalue the distribution side or supply chain side of loss prevention, quite
Yes.
frankly.
Well, they see it, I think, in a very binary way. They think it's kind of a very black and white environment in terms of processes and procedures, and the box comes in one door and it goes out another door. How hard can that be? And I got to tell you, they couldn't have underestimated it more.
So you spent 4 years as a regional.
Yes.
Yeah, how many stores did you have?
Wow. When I was with Dayton's, I want to say it was 60 some odd stores, somewhere in that neighborhood. And that was a new experience, transitioning from, managing one large flagship store to a group of stores in the Midwest, as far east or north, I should say, is North Dakota, but then there was Wisconsin and other parts of the Midwest that I was responsible for. That was a challenge. But at the same time, I learned how to be, what I like to refer to as ubiquitous. Everywhere, all the time.
Right.
And that's something, when you have multi-store responsibility, I think is an invaluable skill set. That means that your impression and your thought process and your presence somehow is believed to be there even when you're not.
So through your people
Through your people,
and through your relationships
your
with store management.
relationships, through your sphere of influence, through your accessibility. A lot of leaders miss that big time. They see accessibility. For example, if you called my office phone, you would hear a recording when I'm not there that gives you my cell phone number. And a lot of people have said to me, Keith, why in the world would you leave your cell phone on your office number? You know how many people will call you and then call your cell phone? And I said, you know what? It very seldom happens. But if people really need to reach me, I want them to feel like it's money in the bank, especially my team members. Anytime you want to reach me, you call me for whatever reason you want to, because I'm accessible. And what I find is that the opposite occurs, because they know they can reach me when they want, so they don't feel like they have to call me because they may not catch that window of time that I have open.
And out of respect.
And out of respect, I might add. But I don't really play that part up. I don't make people feel like it's a penalty to call me for a nothing reason. I think they ultimately figure it out. But for leaders who have multi-store responsibilities and large geographies, it sounds counter or almost unconventional that you would be that accessible. And I would say that's the win for you. If you're extremely accessible, you're everywhere all the time. And don't worry, the good leaders and the strong stores will respect it. And the ones that don't will require your attention anyway.
Absolutely. So you're successful as the regional.
Yes.
And they take you to corporate.
Yes.
And they put you in the manager of distribution position
Yes.
at Target.
Yes.
And shortly thereafter, into a group asset protection team leader.
Yes.
The regional directorship, so to speak.
Yes.
Can you talk to the transition of A, going to corporate, and then B, going to a much larger region and going into Target, a discount chain? You've been in the distribution centers, you've gone into the department stores, now you're going to corporate and you're going into discount.
Well, let me start with the end first, sort
Please.
of. When I made that transition to go to the manager of distribution position at Target, because a lot of people may not realize that was actually a demotion for me. And from a resume perspective, I received coaching that may not be the wisest decision. Because here you are regional, you have multi-store responsibility, you've kind of made it, but you're going to take a step down to go and manage distribution centers. And for me, it was about following a passion that I had, a skill set that I thought was well developed, and it was just an opportunity that I was interested in. So I wasn't caught up in the hierarchy and the traditional flow of how do you get to a director. Yet a year and a half later, I was promoted to director. And I don't know that I could have got there from that regional job that I had that on paper looked more valuable. And what I didn't realize, and I didn't take this distribution center job for this reason, but what I didn't realize is that the exposure in that role was 10 times greater.
Because of the corporate responsibility.
Because of the corporate responsibility.
And you didn't realize it when you were taking it.
No, I just took it because it was a passion. I thought I had a skill set that matched the need, and I thought it'd be an incredible adventure, so I went after it. But it turned out that it had visibility to the president of Target, because we're building all these distribution centers all over the country, and it just elevated. It had a very elevated platform, and I always like to coach people to really go after what you're passionate about. You don't know where it's going to lead. But I have to tell you, it was a wonderful opportunity, and I would have been happy to, be in that role for years. It just so turned out that it worked out to be other things. Now, to take the first part of your question about the transition to corporate, that is really interesting, because if you work a field-related job, you are so used to, being a firefighter. You put on the gear, you show up at the fires, you climb the ladders, you have the hoses, you're good to go. And what I've learned, and there's an analogy, if you don't mind me sharing it.
Certainly.
Firefighters, chiefs, battalion chiefs, are most effective at fires when they stay in the truck. Studies have found that when they exit the truck to go help the troops and to grab a hose and to go up a ladder, people die. People die because no one has the perspective of what's going on with the fire. They can't tell the team to retreat. Backdraft is coming. Go around the other side. You'll be more effective fighting the fire that way.
Can't see the forest from the trees.
They can't see it. They can't
Right,
see it.
right.
So in corporate, part of the discipline that I had to develop, and it was really hard because I love fires. I love being in.
We all do. Everyone does.
How can you not?
Absolutely.
I had to learn the discipline of staying in the truck. Sometimes when I want to travel and be in the field, it was much smarter for me to stay right where I was at because I could read the politics of what was happening with the budget or the capital planning or the next IT project or what have you. I was way more valuable in the truck, in the office, in meetings, being strategic, building relationships there than I was visiting a group of stores or solving for the next issue with respect to shrink in a particular market when I had people who were already doing that. So I had to make sure they were doing that. But staying in the truck was the biggest adjustment I had to learn when I came to corporate.
So was going from the manager of distribution to the GAPTL job at Target, was that part of the preparation for your Mervyns position, so to speak?
Basically, in that transition, that was more about this is a wonderful opportunity to be a regional in your own backyard, to now be a regional on the Target side.
Right.
But I think the powers that be saw that it was the on-ramp for me to ultimately move to the director role.
And let me clarify this for the viewers. A GAPTL position at Target of 60 to 70 stores is much bigger than a regional position in the department store industry, which is anywhere from 10 to 15, maybe 20 stores. So a GAPTL job, the old GAPTL job at Target that no longer exists, is a much larger framed position. So in actuality, a GAPTL is as large as some directorships in the United States, just to go back there. But so they're in essence preparing you for your first directorship at Mervyns.
That's correct.
You moved to San Francisco, which you love, I remember, and you move your family all the way out west.
Yes.
You go into Mervyns,
Yes.
A Dayton-Hudson division, still at the time,
Yes.
part of Target,
Yes.
so you're still in the family,
Yes.
and you take your first directorship of 300 stores,
Yes.
primarily on the western United States.
That's correct.
That has since gone out of business. Okay, can you talk to us about the first 6 months?
Well,
Because to me, quite frankly, the first 6 months is such a key thing over the years.
Right.
Because I've had so many executives to ask me, what do I do? I mean, how do I approach that first 6 months? And I've had so many executives not ask it, but merely I know in the back of their heads, they're fearful of it,
Yes.
As we all are. And how do you approach your first directorship in that 6 months?
That's a great question because, first of all, it was the first time I had been a director. So there was some training wheels, kind of feeling my way around. But one of the things I understood very quickly, and I think it's so important for first-time directors or people who are taking on an assignment that's director level and above, is that you have roughly a 6-month window to make changes. You come in with a lot of authority, a lot of capital support, political capital, if not financial capital, and people want to know, what is it that you bring different to the party. Now, especially if it's a turnaround situation. If it's not, you may want to, kind of walk a little bit more gingerly. But if it's a turnaround situation, meaning you really need to, right a wrong or improve a situation, you have about a 6-month window to think about team member changes and execute them, to think about policies and procedures that you want to upgrade or change around and execute them, to even think about relationships that were in disrepair that you need to overcompensate to rebuild. For example, in one of my first time assignments, the relationship with our legal department was so broken that I went to the extreme of including the attorney that was assigned to our area on every report in every meeting. And people would have thought, that's kind of silly. And ultimately, she kind of backed away and said, you know what, Keith, I'm good here. But at first, she was so intrigued and so, mesmerized by the fact that I would have her completely in our backyard, that it restored the relationship as to where it should be. So in that first 6 months, you have one of those, blank checkbooks to do a lot of things. After that window closes, you'll have some of those checks come back insufficient funds if you start writing them after that. And I think a lot of leaders, get in position and they try to play the junior statesman role, and they sit and they study and they study, and the window closes, and then they are ready to make changes, and they wonder what happened. Well, they kind of became part of the establishment.
So the first 6 months is to read, evaluate, and plan.
And
execute.
Yes.
So, obviously, those 3 years were successful for you, very successful for you.
Yes.
And in 2000, actually, you and I sat down and talked
Right.
About the Gap.
Right.
$14 billion company with 3,000 stores, I believe over 130,000 employees now.
That's correct.
With 227 franchise locations around the world.
Right.
In your first step outside of Dayton-Hudson must have been a little bit like leaving home.
Right.
A little bit. And you join one of the most successful specialty retailers in the world. And Mickey Drexler is still there. Can you talk to us about the first 6 months there and give us some keys to how you manage that?
That was a big transition for me, because up until that point, every new role that you talked about, pretty much, that I took on, I took on with a legacy and a history of credibility within a broader organization. So you say it was kind of risky going from, regional to director on the West Coast. Not really, because I had all of these, guardian angels, who had blessed me and paved the way a little bit.
Right.
And I kind of knew that if I made a mistake, it wasn't going to be the end of the world over a period of 11 years. So I transitioned over to Gap, where no one knows me. I have zero history with them, zero credibility. I'm the new guy. And so what? There was some of that. And it was very interesting. And I think a lot of leaders go through that when they go to a new organization. You really have to say to yourself, how am I going to build up the credibility and the trust that it took me 11 years to get to in my previous organization? And I'm really pleased to say that it is very possible, and you do it one day at a time. And that's the approach I took. Yes, I knew I had a 6-month window to make some key moves, but at the same time, I had years in my mind to get people aligned with my values and my approach and how I led and all the things that I felt were important, not just in LP, but just in general in terms of leadership. And I'm really pleased to say it came around.
Did you have any key mentors back then? If you could name a few or give us some examples of mentors that you've used early on?
Well, the beauty of my life is that it's been filled with mentors all along. That's probably why I believe so much in mentoring. Starting way back when with a track coach by the name of Larry Wazorek, who saw, this incredible athlete and a kid who couldn't win a race to save his life, but who was willing to work his butt off over the summers, and ultimately became, one of the top athletes that ran for him, up to a gentleman by the name of Paul Cogswell, who was just so key in terms of, always making sure that he took me to some meetings that included people like Lou Sheely and a number of other folks, even though, it was like going to the airport and looking at planes up in the sky
Sure.
and wondering, how magnificent they are, but you have no idea how they got there, and that's how I felt as a mentee. I was surrounded by people, in some cases, some who looked like me, in many cases, some who didn't, who were willing to spend time or give me the advice or the support or sponsor me in one way or another to achieve or to attempt, certain things. So it worked out.
So you've been at the Gap 12 years.
Yes.
Can you talk to a couple of the key management philosophies that you've practiced, generically speaking? Can you go there for us?
Yeah, sure. One of the biggest philosophies I have is that, people like to ask, Keith, what do you do to motivate your team? What do you do to drive for results? Drive for results. What do you get people to do to drive people for results? And I always like to say it's in the hiring. And it ends in the hiring.
Mm-hmm.
If I haven't placed the right person in a position, and if I have to motivate them to drive for results, I lost. If I have to give a Newt Rockney speech about why you want to be under 1% in shortage, or why you want to do this, or why you want to do that, I always feel like the battle is lost because they have to want it as much as I do. So I have this thing that I like to say when I'm hiring or promoting people. I look for PhDs, but not the kind of PhD you're probably thinking about, Gus. I look for poor, hungry, and determined.
I love it.
Poor, hungry, and determined. And I don't mean poor in terms of resources, but I mean, someone who's poor in terms of how people have viewed their accomplishments.
Sure.
And they're hungry because they have a chip on their shoulders to show people that they can do more than they've given them credit for. And they're determined because they've always been, they have that track record of having this incredible focus and razor-like, way of getting to the bottom. So to me, when you're promoting someone or when you're hiring someone, if you win there, that's probably one of the best management philosophies I could ever dream of having. The second one, really revolves around just being very innovative and experimental, always cording off some part of the budget, some part of our time to think about, what's possible. And to be free to try it and watch it fail, and experiment again, and to see if you can create that new big idea. And I think that motivates a lot of people.
Obviously, the success of a senior leader is the relationships they have with the senior leadership of an organization, and certainly, over the years, you've seen your share of change in senior leadership.
Absolutely.
What's been the key to your success in navigating that change, delivering what they expect, and what guidance would you give anyone facing senior management change?
Well, this advice applies all the way out to that single store LP or asset protection manager up to a vice president.
So from a store manager all the way up to a CEO or
matter.
a VP of ops or whatever level you're at.
Absolutely. Here's what I've been able to do, and it's been very successful for me. For some reason, I'm just not intimidated by that next level up or the second level up. Whether even when I was an asset protection store manager, LP store manager, the general manager of the store or the district manager just never really intimidated me. I always saw myself and projected myself as an equal, sometimes naively, but always approaching it that way. So viewing things from the way they would view it, reading what they read, analyzing the way they would analyze, and trying my best to approach a dialogue, whether it was a 30-second elevator conversation or a presentation before the board of directors, I always tried to walk in as an equal and approached it as an equal. So if I'm approaching it as an equal when I'm speaking to my CEO, I'm speaking as an owner of the business, not as the guy who's in charge of loss prevention. And that's a completely different mindset. And that's one that I think
Absolutely.
a lot of leaders pick up on right away because the dialogue has to change. So if you are a district asset protection team leader or loss prevention manager and you're talking to your regional director or the zone vice president, and if you're talking about the entire zone or region and the business impact from that perspective, and of course you can drill down to the details in your own region or district, but you can also rise up because you have that kind of perspective. The credibility that's gained from that type of an approach, I always like to think is unmatched.
Now let's talk about team development. I mean, your team has some great LP executives on your team.
Thank you.
How do you develop them? What's your methodology for training and development of your team? I mean, from the district level all the way up to the senior level. I mean, you have some of the very senior executives working for you. I mean, how do you train and develop some of the nation's best and some of the nation's youngest?
Well, it's all about investing in training and development. And we really had the infinite wisdom way back when we actually we recruited and was able to get a manager of training and development. And she didn't specialize in LP. She specialized in organizational development and design, just overall development. Her name is Celia Bew, a wonderful lady. And what we knew back then, and it's still true today, is that somehow, no matter what's going on, you have to dedicate a significant portion of the time that you spend with your team towards their development, growth, and matriculation. It's not enough for them to just kind of get the OJT, the on-the-job training. You have to be intentional, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. So what we've been able to do is carve out not just the time, but the type of training that fits their needs. You know, real individual development goals, real individual development plans, and not plans that, you know, you write one review period and come review time, you dust off and you go, check mark, check mark, check mark. A plan that's alive and well, so that if you wrote a plan on communication and presentations in March and you felt like you mastered it by the May or June, then you need a new development plan. You know, that's just not what we want you to do for the whole year. Are you kidding me? And that's really helped us. So we give her a lot of credit for leading us in that area.
Then let's talk about performance. Establishing it, developing a plan to reach it, and measuring it. I mean, how do you go about doing that in the size of organization that you have at the Gap? And how do you go about holding people accountable to accomplishing it? And what are your measurables?
Well, you have what we call an LRG process, LRP, long range planning process, where we have a vision, if you will, for what the next 4 or 5 or 6 years will look like from a goal perspective. So you have that broad North Star that's always out there. And then you have, you know, the individual years and steps that it takes to get there. And so a big piece of us and our accomplishments when you talk about performance is that we really shoot for the North Star every year, you know, and if we land somewhere on the moon or somewhere in the galaxy, sometimes that's a really good place.
Sure.
Don't always hit it, but everyone is, you know, really, the people that we've recruited and put in place love to hit home runs.
Sure, absolutely.
And you know, you need base hits to score too, but we're just not a small ball type of a team. We like to swing for the fences, and our goals and our planning reflect that. So if you have that North Star out there, and me as a leader, always modeling it, talking about it, and getting people to be energized around that vision of where we're going in the next 3 or 4 years, more often than not, Gus, I find you get there early. You get there early. And sometimes the first year, you may have a setback or what have you, but if you keep that vision and that goal out there, I've always found that you always get there. And a lot of times in my career, I've said to myself, especially when I first started at Gap, the first 2 years were really rocky. And I said, if I have the time, and I wasn't sure that they would give me the time, I know I was just so confident that we could get there because we were doing all of the right things. And then when you know you're doing the right things, and you're disciplined about them and you're committed to it, you can get to that North Star goal if given the right amount of time. But you have to stay focused, you have to stay committed, you have to stay disciplined. And a lot of people, have this, kind of this strategy du jour thing, where and a lot of your audience is going to recognize it. Every year it's a different strategy. What it really should be is every year there's another layer on top of the strategy that you had. And it looks a little different and it's pointed a little bit more forward, but the base is still the same. And the next year there's another base that's layered on the strategy because you understand what a North Star is and you feel good about what you did last year, so why change it? That type of thing.
Sure. You were one of the first specialty retailers out there to establish an ORC effort.
That's great.
I mean, you were in the first few that did that. You've got one of the best programs out there.
Thank you.
Led by Nelson Hara. And can you give us some history on the program and talk to us about how it developed, how it's evolving, and how you measure it? I mean, what makes a successful ORC program in your opinion?
Well, I first of all, this is a wonderful lesson in some of the things that I talked about earlier, not just the North Star goal, but also, having a vision and allowing great team members to do what makes them great. And there was a time when, I knew that was the way you operated, but I didn't always observe that practice. And I remember, when I first met Nelson, he was a regional for us in Texas. And he would travel into our corporate headquarters, and he would give me all of these wonderful updates in San Francisco on organized retail crime activity and things that are happening. And he'd say, Keith, someday we should establish some type of a team that really dealt with this. And I would say, that sounds way out there, Nelson, forgetting about my own belief in always innovating, always trying something new, always trying something different. And finally, it was one of those moments where I said, Nelson, I'm going to give you the keys to the car. I'm going to let you drive this thing, and we'll just have to see where we end up because you're persistent enough where I think there might be something there, but I'm just, you wore me down, basically. and he did. And ultimately, what I found out from that lesson is that even though you have everyone on the right people on the bus, sometimes the bus driver can change. You have somebody else driving, and that's what I learned about our organized retail crime problem is that there's always an emerging trend out there. The key is how you react to it, and I feel great about how we reacted to it. And Nelson and team have done a fantastic job.
Good. Let's talk about technology.
Yes.
Mobile commerce, iPads, iPhones in the workplace, paperless receipts. I mean, how is that changing the loss prevention industry, the loss prevention at the Gap? I mean, everybody is immersed in change with this, and everybody's talking about it and where it's going and how it's redefining our industry. Where do you see it?
This is one of my favorite topics because one of my criticisms of our industry is that we just haven't moved with the technology and the time in a way that I think we could have and we should have. For example, on my phone, I have an application that allows me to do a remote monitoring. I can literally look at a video feed of one of my stores in the San Francisco Bay Area. And ultimately, Gus, I believe that the technology is available now, we're just not using it right, that the camera room that we see in stores will be on one of your agents' phones. We won't have camera rooms anymore. And I just think that when it comes to technology, with respect to things like the iPad and the iPhone, and having an open platform for analyzing cases and that type of thing, there's so much more productivity and so much more efficiencies that could be gained if we had a ringside seat with IT, and that's kind of the last area that I don't think LP has completely integrated
With the IT folks.
with the IT folks. We're still outsiders. We're getting better, and we're doing some things that I think are fantastic. But if you are a service provider to the LP industry, one of their criticisms of us could very easily be, you're not even considered an insider in your own company, so why do you want us to do all of this stuff, that you think is new and great and that type of thing? You don't even help yourself. And I think we have a long ways to go in terms of being fully integrated with the systems and the technology that's out there.
Where do you see the cybercrime impacting the loss prevention industry?
Well, right now, for whatever reason, cybercrime is being given and dealt with more and more by IT security professionals. I think LP absolutely has a role to play in that. There's no question about it. But right now, we're not viewed as subject matter experts in that area. We complement their investigations, we support, we augment, but we're typically not necessarily, as an industry, the owner of that world.
Yeah, we're not first responders.
No.
We are value adders
Yes.
to the investigation that they're conducting.
Yes.
Do you see that merging in 5 years, 10 years? Do you see that role increasing?
I do. You know why? Because with business continuity planning, that used to be the case too.
Yeah.
We were first responders. I'm sorry, we were first responders, but we didn't support or manage the entire business continuity planning process. And now you have people like myself who own it. And I think to think about cyber crimes, it's a very short leap to have us owning things like that too.
Where is the LP program now at the Gap, if I may ask, in relation to your vision? In where do you want to take it? Where do you think it's going? If that in and of itself is a separate question, and I understand it's broad, but given the technology wave, where do you see, how would you grade the program and where do you see it going at the Gap?
Wow. I think we have a very good program. I think we've made some incredible inroads in areas like IT. We've been extremely innovative in our hard tagging from the source. We have a first-class, I think, agent program. We develop our team members well. I think they're professional. I think they're effective. I think the next chapter for us would include, being fully integrated with the emerging technology trends that we've seen, not only within our own company, but in the industry. I think that's one of the areas that we're coming around and we're turning the corner on. Another area that we're really starting to develop a lot of acumen in, Gus, is an area that I call institutionalized shrink. Most, I would say, apparel retailers, from an LP perspective, deal with theft, internal, external, supply chain theft. But the non-theft related items, the more systemic causes of shrink, is not an area that we spend a lot of time on. And what we've seen, in the last couple of years is that the investment in process also has a tremendous payback in terms of shrink reduction. So, as we develop our acumen as retailers first, and then loss prevention professionals second, you will see the LP department at Gap Inc. Really emerged as some incredible, well-rounded, very balanced professionals.
So if you look back over the last 12 years, Keith, what are just two or three that you would consider to be your biggest accomplishments? If you could single them down a little bit.
That's really hard because, hopefully if you're humble, you like to think that you're only as good as your last, as I like to say, my last 6 months.
Exactly.
And I really believe that. If I took the long view of it, I would have to say the professionalism that I've seen my team, develop and grow into. I mean, if I wasn't even associated with this group, and I saw the types of things that they do, and how they approach the industry, and how they support the industry, and how selfless they are about the things that they engage in, and even a lot of volunteer activity that they work on, I would want to be a part of this team. So that hasn't been one accomplishment. That's just been kind of an amalgamation of different things that have come together that have I really think make them stand out. Of course, the results have matched that too. Overall, the results have been really strong. So it's hard to put my finger on one or two things. I just like the fact that it's been an organization that's grown into a real reputable group.
All right, have there been any key defining moments for the LP program? Marvin Ellison, a couple of years ago at the National Retail Federation LP show, talked about some of the key defining moments for the Home Depot's LP program. Have there been any for the Gap? Have there been a couple that you can look back on and say, here's a couple of points in time where we really hit the mark? This is us.
There's as I think about that question, that's an excellent question. We went to soft tagging from the source, not hard tagging from the source. We made a decision, I think it was back in '04, that we would eliminate hard tags and that we would go to the paper tag that we would put on everything. And I remember receiving a lot of criticism for that decision, both internally, from my own team members and
from the industry
colleagues, and externally.
Sure.
Are you crazy? You're going to drop a hard tag and you're going to go to a perforated tag that the thieves can just cut out, and they did.
Yeah.
But it was defining for us because what people didn't know in that whole calculation was the fact that it meant for me that we could go to hardware, hard tagging hardware for every single store in the chain. And that was a big deal because I said to myself, in the short term, I don't know if soft tagging is going to work or not, but the second act in this play is going to be incredible, because if it doesn't work and we can go back to hard tags, we've now set up the infrastructure. So it was one of those chess moves where people bit on the knight.
Sure.
He left his knight open. I got him. Clear path, and the queen came up. And for me, it was a defining moment because we took a large risk. We kind of put our necks out there, but it set us up to double down and go big on a hard tagging from the source program that I don't think could have occurred in one step. It was a multi-step initiative, and that to me was one of our biggest defining moments. And we've done other things like that because that became kind of the roadmap. Make one bold move to be able to make three, and see where it gets you, and we've been able to do stuff like that.
So in keeping with that same genre, so to speak,
Yes.
over the last 12 years, if there's two things that you could change, what would they be?
I'm not a person, Gus, who regrets or who goes back and thinks about things that you could change, because I really believe that everything happens for a reason. You learn from
Sure, absolutely.
every circumstance. But I guess if I had the luxury of going back and changing something, or the two things as you say. Um, the only thing I can think of is, I would have worked harder not to lose key members of my team. Sometimes people get recruited away, or they make the decision to leave and pursue other opportunities, and they're just brilliant, wonderful, human beings. And if there's anything, it would have been, what could I have done differently? Because you always scratch your head about, how could I have kept this person on the team and not allowed them to, leave? That's what it would have been.
Well put. Well put. You've been involved in the National Retail Federation Loss Prevention Advisory Council for the last 15 years, I believe.
Yes.
Can you talk to that a little bit and what that's meant to you in helping you, defining you, and in the contributions you've been able to make to the industry, and what that represents overall, maybe what it's done for the gap on the ELP program there?
Right. Well, there's a saying I once heard, people only know the story. They only know the glory, they don't know the story. And if they knew the story behind the NRF, it goes a little something like this. When I was that young man in the distribution center working as a loss prevention supervisor, that was my first job, I sought out the As-Is organization, American Society for Industrial Security, and I ultimately worked my way onto their retail committee, and I served at the local chapters, and I went to security meetings, and I was part of another investigator network, and I think it was called Investigator Specialists in Chicago. So I had a very rich legacy, even when nobody cared about what I thought, of joining and supporting and learning and building a network. So by the time I got to the NRF, it was without question an honor to be asked to join the Advisory Council, but it was something I was already doing. This wasn't new for me. I was already contributing on a local level in so many other ways. This was just the next step up. So the NRF represented for me a continuation of my involvement and my commitment to the industry. And I really have to say to those, especially some of the newer people in our industry, if you someday want to sit on the NRF Advisory Council or any other big council that you have your sights set on, do something locally, get involved, engage yourself, support what you can in a big way, because it ultimately will lead to this. But if you think that someday you just kind of get a call to come up to the big leagues, number one, it rarely happens that way, and number two, when it does happen, you'll be so unprepared it'll be ridiculous. So.
Good advice. Good advice. Now let's talk about your passion, one of your passions.
Okay.
The International Organization of Black Security Executives.
Yes.
In the contributions it makes to the youths thinking about careers in criminal justice or retail loss prevention.
Yes.
Can you give us just a brief history in where is it going and how is it preparing these youths for tomorrow?
Yeah, well, first of all, just a little history about the organization. It started in 1982 by 5 gentlemen who were attending an As-Is conference and really were disappointed at the fact that there wasn't a lot of people of color in the industry that they loved, and they had done a lot of great things in, and they were very senior people in their roles back then. And they created this organization to kind of create a pipeline so that more people of color, African Americans in particular, had a way to crack the code and to support and engage in a professional end of the security business. Because there was a ton of diversity at the hourly levels. There just wasn't much in the management and senior management of the industry. So that was kind of the foundation of what started IOBSC. Now you fast forward, by the time I joined them in 1992, they were visiting historically black college campuses. They had their annual conference and seminars. But most importantly for me, Gus, it was an organization that gave me access to people who had accomplished great things and who looked like me. And up until that point, I just didn't know those people existed. And with that access comes, obviously, mentoring, comes a support network, and it also comes, another avenue of knowledge for you to gain and ultimately, achieve, I think, even more than what you achieved up to that point. So it's an organization that, I think, just fundamentally serves a role in the industry around diversity that's not only unique, but I would argue vital to the overall success of the loss prevention or security industry. So.
Keith, with technology and everything that's going on out there in the world today with the changes in retail, how do you see that impacting the successful LP executive's profile of tomorrow? What do you think there?
Well, I think technology and the changes in technology, Gus, more or less will be the price of entry. I think if you can't relate and connect and drive an organization that has a plethora of different types of technologies and pieces to it, you're not going to be very successful, period. However, the one thing that you may be overlooking is the fact that so many companies are multinational now that the LP executive of the future, especially senior level, and I'm talking 4, 5, 8, 10 years down the road, will have had to have some type of international experience. I'm not necessarily saying they have to live abroad, although that's becoming perhaps a little bit more likely, but their experience internationally will definitely have to serve them, have had served them in one way or another.
So from a technology standpoint, do you see IT security and typical loss prevention merging together at all or getting closer?
I do. It's going to be an interesting marriage, though, because the IT security piece is such a technical world. But the best, gauge of someone's future is if you just kind of take a quick look at their past. And I don't know that people would have bet that LP would own e-commerce at this stage of the game, and many of us do. And that's why I think that that's a contiguous, area for us.
A part of that evolution.
Part of that evolution, a part of that world. They're first cousins. So I see us eventually moving in that direction. Yes.
Good, excellent. Well, Keith, I want to thank you for appearing today.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. This was fascinating.
Great having you here.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this episode of the Loss Prevention News Network. I'd like to thank all of you for watching. And remember, when you're out in the stores, it's all about the relationships. Thank you.